New York's infamous Blue Note era comes to Mars Hill January 24th for a special one-night-only concert at Mars Landing Galleries. Civil Disobedience is a project bowing to the politically conscious underground jazz of 1960s New York City. You'll hear music from progressive composers such as Bobby Hutcherson, Jackie McLean, Stanley Cowell, Howard Land, Joe Chambers, and James Spaulding. Much of their music wasn't released on record till decades later, and you can hear New York musicians performing it live January 24th. Seating is intimate and limited. For tickets and details, go to marslandinggalleries.com.
I am a maker, a builder, a baker, although sometimes my messes are all that you'll find. I'll tell a story, both true and allegory. Oh, the process is precious, so it takes up all my time.
Sue Polston's story is a screenwriter's dream. Raised in a fractured home, she became a mother as a teenager and fell into drug addiction. Today, she's the executive director of Sunrise Community for Recovery and Wellness. Sunrise is a peer support network of 50 staffers in Asheville, helping those with mental health and substance use disorders, experiencing homelessness, or incarceration.
Based on my experience when I was out in the community, I knew all the resources because I accessed them myself. So I went to the ABCM soup kitchen. I've been to closed closets. I did a housing application, all those things. I know when I go back into the jail, well, I'd also been to Buncombe County Jail. And so that's what makes peers able to really connect.
I'm Matt Peiken, and this is The Overlook, a podcast about the news, arts, issues, and trends of Asheville, North Carolina. Today, we meet Sue Polston and learn about Sunrise's vital work. We dig into their range of peer support programs, talk about the stigmas that challenge people in her circle, and learn about Polston's own path from addiction and despair to community leadership. Sue Polston has been involved with Sunrise for nearly a decade. She became a certified peer support specialist 8 years ago and elevated to director in 2019. I began our conversation by asking whether Sunrise's work in the field has changed much since Polston began working in peer support.
Absolutely. So I'm also a person in recovery myself. That's what qualifies me as a peer support specialist. And so I've recently celebrated 10 years. And so I would even say in the last 5 years, things have changed quite a bit.
How so? In what ways?
For me, my substance of choice was crack, and the streets, the game, if you would, was a certain way, and it is not that anymore. Now folks are literally playing Russian roulette every time they use any substance. It's changed out there in the streets, and so many of our folks are dying.
You said it's Russian roulette with any substance. I think that's probably news for a lot of people. We hear a lot about fentanyl, different opioids, but you're saying any substance.
Absolutely. So unfortunately, we had somebody very close to us and a staff member a couple of years ago thought they were doing something safer by doing cocaine, and it was laced with fentanyl, and they overdosed and died.
So it's not so much that other drugs, pot, cocaine, you name it, they themselves had not necessarily become more dangerous. It's that you just don't know what the drug you're using is laced with.
Correct.
Wow.
Yeah.
And there's no way to know.
Yeah, there is. There are fentanyl test strips. There's, excuse me because I can't say it, but xylene is a new drug that's out there right now, and they do have test strips for that as well. So if you are actively using, there is ways to test your product to potentially see if it could be fatal or not. Sunrise itself has a syringe services program and harm reduction program, and we do have those available for anyone.
So with a lethal level of drugs that weren't introduced 10 years ago, has that made your job across the board, you and your other peer support specialists, has that made it a lot more difficult?
Yeah, for sure. Like I said, we've lost so many friends, family members to addiction, and with just the whole epidemic. And so that weighs heavy on us. You know, we're human beings, and it's really important that we just take care of ourselves and that our support system is there, because it is hard, and we do take on the feelings and emotions, and it can be extra stressful and taxing.
Not only that, but I imagine the actual work that you do in terms of helping people might be more difficult. So let's talk about Sunrise. There are a lot of nonprofits and other agencies in this town that are tasked with helping people in addiction and through recovery. Talk about Sunrise. What is the unique mission of Sunrise?
We are 100% peer run and managed. From my position to the other 49 positions, we are all either already certified, which is the big bulk of it, and then some of our newer staff are in the process of becoming certified, but definitely qualify. So to me, that's the one uniqueness about it, is that we all have done that, been there, and are able to provide hope and inspiration just based on our own experiences.
Now, is the mission to wean people or get people off of drugs or get them through or past addiction? Or is it simply to recognize that people are using and to give them some support so that the worst doesn't happen? Give me a sense of when people who are addicted come to your attention, what happens in the Sunrise programs?
So we have a multitude of different programs, and we actually can encompass every stage of that. So we do have our harm reduction program. So those are generally folks that might be still actively using in ways to reduce harm. And then we have reentry programs.
Well, let's go through piece by piece. I know you have a thing called Peer University.
Yes.
What is Peer University?
So Peer University was a thought and idea from a board member and our founder, and it is a 3-tiered program. So a lot of folks are like, oh, yeah, I'm in recovery. I should be a peer support. Peer support is not made for everyone. And Peer University, in that first tier, you can sign up for our classes. We have a multitude of different modules and trainings that we do during the Peer University program. Sometimes, actually, a handful of folks have actually been like, nope, this definitely isn't for me. And then others go on to get certified. Many of our peer support, our Peer University graduates are actually our staff members now.
So I just wanted to be clear. Peer University is for people who've maybe gone through recovery themselves and want to contribute in terms of a counseling level. This trains them and certifies them to then take on that role.
Yeah, I would say it's not counseling or anything like that. It's not.
It isn't. So distinguished, I think that's important to know. Yeah. What is different about what peer-to-peer support means through Sunrise as opposed to counseling?
Sure. So counseling is clinical, right? We need our counselors. We need our therapists. We need our doctors. We need everybody on our team. Peer support is just another piece of that team. It's evidence-based practice. It's very highly recognized, but it isn't like we don't have counseling sessions. We'll have peer sessions, and what I'll do is I'll share my own personal lived experience. I don't care about their diagnosis. I don't care about anything like that. So it's really just a back and forth conversation.
Is it like, and I've not been through an NA or AA program, but is it similar to that where peers share their stories with each other and relate to one another and feel a certain, or hopefully feel a certain ease and kismet with each other because you've all gone through it? Is that basically this?
It has some similarities, yes. We are not 12 steps, but we do support 12 steps. I personally have a 12-step foundation. I no longer attend those meetings. So it is similar in that peer-to-peer, but with peer support at Sunrise, we don't have any expectations. We're not, if we were in a 12-step fellowship, we'd be working with folks to work through steps of the program. That's not something that we do. So
give me a typical interaction that happens in the peer-to-peer program through Sunrise.
So it could happen in many ways. We're all over the place. We cover the entire region. So some of our peers are out in the van in rural areas. Some of them are right here at our drop-in center at Westgate currently. And so it could look different, but basically, say somebody walks into the drop-in center, there's a little tablet, you just sign in, no IDs required, absolutely no fee for services ever, except for maybe some of our training programs. But for our peers, our participants that are walking through the door, there's no cost and no requirement, no expectation. Basically, we're asking, what are your needs and what are your goals?
Yeah, what do people want out of peer-to-peer support if it isn't counseling, if it isn't clinical in that way? What are people needing from other people who have used?
Based on my experience when I was out in the community, I don't do that hands-on work as much anymore. But I know for me, I knew all the resources because I accessed them myself. So I went to the ABCM soup kitchen. I've been to closed closets. I did a housing application, all those things. And so that's what makes peers able to really connect. I know when I go back into the jail, that's been pre-COVID, I was going into the jail. Well, I'd also been to Buncombe County Jail. And so to sit with the women and point at the cell that I was in, they melted, you know, and it's just like, oh, okay, I can trust you. You know me, because I am you. and that's just a really special uniqueness around peer support.
Does this connect to also, I saw another program called Peers on the Move. What is that? How does that relate to this?
So Peers on the Move is our van. We finally got a van. We have packed up, if you can visualize, packing up our recovery community center brick and mortar into the van. This program right now is set to go within 1 mile of Asheville into the rural areas. So even Candler, Black Mountain, Big Ivy, they've been going out there a lot. So they're able to give access to folks that may not be able to make it down to the Recovery Community Center in Asheville. And we are providing not only the one-on-one peer support, but basic needs, whatever that may be. You know, if somebody says, hey, I don't have an ID, we'll help them get that ID. Whatever it is that they need to break down the barriers that might lead to them thriving.
You mentioned Buncombe County Jail, and one of the programs you have is a medication-assisted treatment program in partnership with Buncombe County Detention Center. Talk about that.
Yeah, so that's been a huge success. We are recognized from the state level, from Attorney Josh Stein, recognizing that program as like one of the best ones in the state. And
what does it do?
Historically, prior to this program, folks would come in from being arrested, being like a full detox, which can be very physically and mentally, emotionally, all the things that they just didn't do a proper detox protocol. And so people were suffering. I actually witnessed a lady jump off the balcony because she just couldn't do the detoxing anymore. And this is back at least 10 years ago. So things have changed. They are able to offer medication-assisted treatment. There are certain criteria and guidelines. And basically they can receive their Suboxone, some cases methadone, while they are incarcerated, so they don't risk that detox.
So you're sort of a go-between, a liaison to identify what some of these people who are incarcerated, what they need and are looking for, and you talk with county staff and say, I think this person needs X, Y, or Z.
Yeah, so they come in during booking and they're asked, do you use substances? And those folks that identify right off the bat would go to one of our peers for a referral. Sometimes folks are coming in that are already connected with clinics, and we're just trying to make sure that continuum happens with their medicine.
It sounds like in some ways you might also tell me if this is a role that you and the peer support specialists who work for you do. You're supplementing what county staff do. County staff aren't large enough to handle all the cases they would need to, all the people who come into the county detention center, that in a sense, you're sort of adding to the numbers of staff. Is that one way of looking at it, is that you have the training to support county staff in this?
Yeah, so a lot of the county staff are very educated on trauma-informed care, and a lot of them are very receptive and supportive through all of this. And right now we have 2 peers that are in there and in the community. So the cool thing is we also follow folks up to a year after they're released to continue. It's not just about the medication assisted. It's about, do you need housing? Do you need transportation? All the things. I think it's in addition to what the county's doing, but there's another program too. Actually, RHA runs, and they're in the jail too, and they have some peers. I know at the Buncombe County Jail now on Fridays, there's a handful of peer supports that are going in for Power Hour.
What's RHA?
RHA is one of the community behavioral health companies here in Asheville. So there's RHA, Family Preservation, October Road.
So you work, in some ways, you work complementary and in concert with these other organizations.
Yeah.
Because that's one of the things I think people have a sense of, that there are some organizations in town that overlap in mission. They each have their own distinct roles, but they really depend on each other to work in concert with one another.
Yeah, because Sunrise can't do it by themselves. I guess it takes the entire community, all the community partners, to all really come together and work together, because we're working with the same folks.
More after this. The First Look newsletter brings you news headlines from all over Asheville every weekday morning. You can scan it at a glance and see if there's something you've missed or just need to know more about. There are no ads disguised as stories, just the headlines in a quick, easy read. Get the First Look newsletter for free at podavl, that's podavl.com/newsletter. You have some other programs here. You have two other things I want to talk about. You have a harm reduction, which is designed to reduce negative impacts of behavior associated with substance use. And this gets to a little bit of what we started the conversation on, and how things have just gotten worse in 10 years. Talk about the behaviors that you're seeing now associated with fentanyl and opioid use that maybe you weren't seeing, you yourself and others who were using 10 years ago just wasn't getting. How has the behavior changed?
It's scary. It's sad. Recently, I stopped in an Ingles parking lot because I seen this lady just talking to the sky, and I just stopped to make sure that she was okay at least. And so that's very more noticeable. So people's behaviors, I'm sure everybody's heard about the downtown issues and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, the behavior, I don't have any experience with the fentanyl and the xylene and all that, but that has, I think, really changed folks and how they're.
Yeah, you don't have experience using it, but you and your colleagues have experience in seeing the effects of it. And you're talking about, you just alluded to, we've all seen in downtown this rise in people who clearly are on some effect of drugs in a way that from a distance we weren't seeing 10 years ago. You and your colleagues are like frontline soldiers in this, because you said you approached that woman at Ingles. 99 people out of 100 would not have approached that person. Now when you're approaching people, do the interactions, are they different? Are they more challenging now? Is it tougher for you to get through to that person and have an actual conversation where you can assess what this person needs?
Yeah, sometimes in that moment when they are in, psychosis of sorts, whether it's substance related or just mental health related too. Mental health has increased significantly too. So it's not just substances that we're seeing out there that are contingent with this same behavior. We do have folks that are just very
mentally ill.
Mental, very significant.
How do we suss out, or how do we parse out what is drug influenced and what isn't drug influenced in terms of those mental health challenges that we're seeing on the street every day? What would you want people to know about what maybe some of the perceptions are versus what you think and you and your colleagues see as realities?
I would suggest that it doesn't matter if it's mental health or substances, it's all mental health. And to remember that person is a human no matter what, and they are not in their right minds in the moment. And it may not be the right time right then to try to assess what their needs are, right? Because for peer support, we don't tell anyone what their needs are. We ask them what their needs are. And so if they're not able to communicate that, then that's just not the right time. But we've at least planted a seed for that person possibly, and maybe do a follow-up and see what that person needs later.
And this gets to the last program thing I wanted to ask you about, which is the Respite Center. And from what I understand, that's an alternative to inpatient psychiatric hospitalization, which I think a lot of people in the community would say, let's hospitalize those people, get them off the streets and get them into some sort of forced either hospitalization or incarceration. How does the Respite Center, how does this define itself as an alternative to that?
Our respite, it was the very first in North Carolina. We started with a 3-bedroom house. We now have a 5-bedroom house that we keep about 4 beds full most times. It is for anyone who is over 18, resides anywhere in North Carolina, and is experiencing emotional distress. And I don't know about you, but I could identify emotional distress almost daily. So a good candidate, or there's a bunch of good candidates, but one candidate would be, for example, I know the death of my daughter is coming up in November, and I have a really hard time. I usually end up in a psych unit. Let me reach out to the Blair H. Clark Respite House and see if I can stay during that week. And what we have found is that when folks do, then they are avoiding the typical patterns of whether they're IVC'd, which is a whole thing.
What's IVC'd?
Involuntarily committed. So when a lot of police officers or family members feel that person is a harm to themselves or others, they will forcibly lock them down. That in itself is very traumatic, so we want to avoid that whenever possible.
Right, but you just mentioned how somebody who is anticipating an episode would voluntarily enroll themselves or admit themselves into the respite center. I would imagine that's very infrequent, right? That people anticipate having a psychotic episode. It usually just happens, right? And then before they even know it, they're out of control. Tell me if I'm wrong on this, but of the 5 beds that might be full at any given time, all 5 of those people, none of them voluntarily of their own advance warning said, oh, I'm going to have an episode, I better enroll here. So how do they come into your system?
The unfortunate part with only having 4 beds, we're just like barely touching the surface on the need, and we have a wait list. The respite is not for immediate placement. It is not for anyone in active crisis, anyone in need of a medical detox from substances. And so those are the criteria. And generally how it works is the individual would call the respite. They would do basic demographic information. And within 2 to 3 days, one of our staff would call them back and do a more in-depth conversation to see, where they're at, what their need is, what their goals will be. It is a 7-night maximum stay. You can stay less, but most people stay the 7 nights. We do have a lot of our unhoused population that really benefit from coming into the respite for 7 nights.
We've gone over a broad brushstroke of the range of programs that you have at Sunrise. One of the lines of conversation or comment I hear in the community is, Asheville has the homeless problem that it does. It has the addiction problem that it does, in no small part because we have so many agencies and services that are here to support them, that people who are homeless or addicted know that they can get care in Asheville, so they come to Asheville, and that's why we're having such a problem. I think that's people on the outside looking in, outside meaning they are not addicted, they are not homeless, but they live in this community. What's your response to people who believe it's because we offer such a range of services from Sunrise and other agencies that we, in part, can attribute our homeless and addicted problem to that?
So we have connection within the Homeless Coalition as well. So Sunrise volunteers and is a part of the Point in Time. Thank you. And so we've been around the last few years to really capture some of that data firsthand. The majority of those that are unsheltered are either natives here, have a tie here, whether they're families in the Western North Carolina region. Very few actually just came here because they heard the resources were great. As a organization that is working regionally in other rural counties that don't have anything, that's one of our goals, and some of the things that we're doing is building up a recovery ecosystem like we have here in other areas, because there isn't recovery housing. We're resource rich. Even 10 years ago, we didn't have what we have now. And if we did, I feel like maybe I could have flourished even sooner. I don't know. I'm super stoked that we're able to offer the things we do, because these are exactly the things I needed when I got out of jail and when I got out of treatment.
Let's talk about your story a little bit. I don't want to draw a big magnifying glass on that. Everybody has their story and their downturns. You mentioned you've been incarcerated, you've gone through addiction. What came first?
Okay, so I don't know if there's basic childhood trauma, nothing huge and significant. I had a father that was addicted to cocaine, and a stepfather that was an alcoholic, and a mother that was a workaholic. And so that was my childhood. I became pregnant and had a daughter at a very young age. I finished high school. She was 2. I was a hairdresser, and then she died by accidental drowning. And so that trauma is what led me to substances. And then just 12 to 15 years trying to get it right. And for so long, I would just focus on the fact that I had to stop using drugs. But it wasn't until 10 years ago that I was, okay, I need to focus on my mental health. And I need to focus on the drugs. Like, I knew how to not use drugs. I just didn't know how to not use drugs for a long time. But when I was able to wrap my head around that I needed mental health and substance use support, that's what helped me sustain not using drugs.
So you had obviously your own journey in this. What have you learned on this job and in doing this work that you didn't know through your own journey?
For example, our syringe services program, our harm reduction program, I have zero experience or know what that's like. I was not an IV user, so that's really opened my eyes. I will say also, when I first started as a peer, and like I said, I was in a 12-step fellowship, I had, in my opinion, I had a very closed mind. I thought you had to do it this way and this is how it works. The more I got into peer support, the more it broadened my idea that there are people that could use a harm reduction approach and still be successful and still thrive. There's people that can use medication assistance. Like, I'm going to be honest, years ago, I thought that was just another drug, and I was very closed-minded about it. So that's opened my eyes based on data. Like, I'm seeing. I also have a sober living house, and we have some of the guys that are on medication assistant treatment. I have staff on medication assistant treatment. I see it work. And so it really, my open-mindedness has completely just flourished.
So what do you see as Sunrises and other organizations working alongside you? What do you see as your greatest challenge facing you right now? Stigma
Of those who have not been there or done that. Those who just see the erratic behavior and just classify everybody as not well. Or we have had stigma challenges at every one of our locations that we're at pretty badly. So I would say stigma is still just a huge challenge. We've come a very long way, but there's so much work to do. The not in my backyard stuff,
How do you battle that here? It takes a political lobbying in some ways, and you talk about the stigma, and that always gets exacerbated by the next instance of something publicly happening with one person or some violent episode that I imagine brands everyone going through homelessness or addiction issues with the same broad brushstroke.
Yeah, and again, I just would challenge folks to really just see that person as a human, right? That is somebody's child. Thank goodness you haven't had that experience in your family, but it's in a lot of families. And so please don't classify everybody just all in the same because they look the same or doing the same things or don't have a home.
How can the community, or can the community get involved, people who may not have used and aren't going to be peer support specialists, beyond giving money, which obviously every small nonprofit wants that? Beyond that, how can the community be involved or be supportive?
Again, be open-minded, be compassionate and empathetic. We do have volunteers that are not they're recovery allies. They don't have personal experience. We do all kinds of things to give back to our community, and we would love to have somebody help. We're always going and volunteering, and so they can come along with us. We do outreach, so we're at places like 12 Baskets and Haywood Street and at A-Hope. They come along and just be with us. And it's really just about being present there for the person that walks up or the person in need. Sometimes people just want to be heard, and then they're good.
How has this changed your personal world, being the executive director of this organization? How has this changed your life here?
It's given me lots of passion and purpose. And so my journey with Sunrise, like I said, in January, it'll be 7 years that I've been there. I started as a program coordinator, then I was the team lead at the respite house, and then I was an operations director. And as we grew, I grew. I don't have any formal education on how to do this. I was freaked out about it. I said I could not be an executive director. I don't know what I'm doing. And my supports and my mentors along the way really just, yeah, you can, you got this. And then here we are 4 years later as the executive director and with 50 staff and just like really blown up. And I am super passionate to be able to give this opportunity to other peers, that for the opportunity that was given to me. Sunrise gave me a chance, even with all my felonies, gave me a chance, even with no education beyond a high school diploma. And it has changed my life personally and professionally, that I love being able to give that opportunity to somebody else so they have the chance to do that too.
Our First Look newsletter gives you just a handful of daily headlines from around the local media landscape to get you on your morning. We also have a weekly newsletter devoted to all things The Overlook that hits you every Friday. Both are free and available at podavl.com/newsletter. I want to thank my guest today, Sue Polston of the Sunrise Community for Recovery and Wellness. Our conversation happened inside the BB Theater in downtown Asheville. The owners, Susan and Giles Collard, have been so gracious enough to allow me to record my interviews there. Our theme music for The Overlook, Maker's Song, comes courtesy of the Asheville band The Resonant Rogues. The Overlook is a production of Podcast Asheville. New episodes come out every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday wherever you get your podcasts. You can find us on any social media channel at AVL Overlook. And I'll see you on the next episode of The Overlook with Matt Piken.
Curious how the word y'all has conquered the English-speaking world? Ever wonder why there are so many dollar stores and what they mean to the American landscape? I'm Anissa Khalifa, host of the new podcast, The Broadside, from North Carolina Public Radio. We explore stories at the heart of the American South. Each week, we go beyond the headlines and cover a single topic that impacts our region, and explain how it reverberates across the country. Follow The Broadside wherever you get your podcasts.